In fantasy football, we all have rankings that we hold near and dear to our heart, but are any of those rankings ever perfectly correct? No, they're not. No matter how many different websites we look at, no matter how many different experts give their opinions on rankings, they're never perfectly correct. And that's okay. No human is perfect. Just like any March Madness bracket you fill out, it's almost like a guarantee that you're going to get something wrong. And that's how exactly what rankings feel like. And that's why on this channel, I am not really a big proponent of making rankings, because what's the point if I know I'm going to get almost all of them wrong? In this video, I'm going to give you guys my top dark horse players that are likely to finish at the top of their position. So we're going to go over QB, running back, wide receiver, and tight end. This is not me projecting or expecting any of these players to actually finish the best at their position. This is more so explaining how each of these players have a pathway and a ceiling potential to reach overall one in their position. If you're new here and you like fantasy football content, feel free to hit the subscribe button. It costs you nothing, and it may be in your best interest if you're a fan of fantasy football content, as we pump out a lot of videos throughout the week on this channel. Enough of me yapping and giving nonsense. Roll the intro. My dark horse candidate to finish as the QB1 overall in 2024 is none other than Anthony Richardson of the Indianapolis Colts. In just 4 games last year, Anthony Richardson was sensational in just those 4 games. And I know it's a small sample size, and obviously injuries are going to be the biggest factor in terms of can Anthony Richardson finish as the QB1 overall. But being that he's only played 1 season in the league, it's not fair to label him or assess him as injury prone. Just after 1 NFL season, it's really not fair to label any player as injury prone. Injuries happen. We have to understand that, and we have to not be afraid to draft players because of injuries. Anyone and everyone can get injured. I understand with Anthony Richardson's playing style, he may be more likely to get injured than some of these other quarterbacks that can finish as QB1. But to highlight how good Anthony Richardson really was in his rookie season, if he ended up playing even just most of the games, or just any more than 4, he was on pace to have the number 1 fantasy points per play out of any quarterback. And yes, that means more fantasy points per play than somebody like Josh Allen, who had 15 rushing touchdowns last season and was clearly the best quarterback in fantasy. Richardson also averaged more fantasy points per game, though it was a small sample size, than Patrick Mahomes did last year in 2023. And now I understand the other side of that argument would be that this was a down season for Patrick Mahomes, but if we're going to say that Patrick Mahomes is a candidate to be the best quarterback in fantasy, which he definitely is. I'm not saying he's not, and I'm not saying that other players like Jalen Hurts aren't in that running for the QB1 contention. This is more so just giving a dark horse like Anthony Richardson, who clearly has the ceiling and potential to reach quarterback 1 overall. Moving on to the running back position, sure, Christian McCaffrey is the favorite, and a lot of people want to anoint Bijan Robinson or Breece Hall as the RB1 competitors here, as the 3 guys fighting for that overall spot. What if I told you that Derrick Henry is a dark horse to finish as the RB1 overall? We have yet to see a downfall in terms of production from Derrick Henry in football or fantasy football. And until we see it, I can't project that as something that's very likely. And let's not forget, Derrick Henry is joining the Baltimore Ravens, who were not only the number 1 rushing team last year, but they were also number 1 in rushing attempts last year. So we know volume is going to be there for the King. I see a lot of people online making this sort of argument that just like Saquon Barkley has a vulture of rushing touchdowns in Philadelphia with Jalen Hurts, that Derrick Henry will lose some of his opportunity in the goal line or at the goal line to Lamar Jackson, but I'm going to, in this video, explain why none of that should be a concern if you want to draft Derrick Henry. If we compare Lamar Jackson's stats to the clear best two quarterbacks in fantasy last year, who were also the best rushing quarterbacks in fantasy, Josh Allen had 111 rushing attempts in 2023. 33 of those attempts were inside the 20. 14 of those carries were inside the 5-yard line. And from the 20 going in, Josh Allen had 15 rushing touchdowns, which is super impressive. Now, Jalen Hurts had 157 rushing attempts, which is a lot, had 44 carries inside the 20-yard line. 16 of those carries came inside the 5-yard line, and he also had 15 rushing touchdowns from the 20. Now, looking at Lamar Jackson's rushing profile last year, Lamar Jackson had 148 rushing attempts. 32 of those were inside of the 20. So, yes, Lamar Jackson does run the ball a lot. We do know this to be true. We didn't know or didn't really expect such a large percentage disparity to be significantly less than those two other quarterbacks who are actually getting red zone carries at a way higher clip. Where Josh Allen had 14 carries inside the 5-yard line, Jalen Hurts had 16 carries inside the 5-yard line. Lamar Jackson had 5 rushing attempts from the 5-yard line and in. So that's just as many as Kyler Murray did in 8 games last season, and just as much as Justin Fields had in 13 games last season. Lamar also had 5 rushing touchdowns from the 20-yard line and in, and as we saw last year, when they got down in goal-to-go situations or even the red zone, Gus Edwards was deployed a lot, and that's why Gus Edwards had such a great fantasy season last year, was all of those rushing touchdowns that he was able to accumulate. Now, take Gus Edwards out of that offense because he's on the Chargers now. Now we have a more skilled back taking these goal line and 20 to go carries and handoffs. This is truly a great potential for Derrick Henry. Maybe he's not going to score 20 touchdowns on the ground, though it's probably a possibility, of course. I probably wouldn't project that. To say that Derrick Henry is going to lose his rushing work in goal-to-go or red zone situations because Lamar Jackson is a running quarterback just simply is not true, and the stats back that up. I believe the Baltimore Ravens went ahead and signed Derrick Henry, knowing that all they really needed was rely on somebody like Derrick Henry to just bruise forward and gain them rushing touchdowns. And there are a lot of rushing touchdowns to be had now with the departure of Gus Edwards. Combine this with the fact that there truly is no running back competition right now, as Justice Hill is the only one healthy currently that's even worth rolling out there. This offense may just be the feed the hot hand of Derrick Henry, and Keaton Mitchell and Justice Hill can just fall to the wayside as Derrick Henry gets all of the backfield touches for the Ravens. Now moving on to wide receiver. And of course, this is a real interesting one because you have CeeDee Lamb, you have Tyreek Hill. Those are probably your favorites and nobody's considering them a dark horse. And then there's that next tier right past them who are Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase, who we know are more than capable of finishing as the wide receiver 1 overall. But what if I told you there was a true chance that somebody like A.J. Brown could finish as the wide receiver 1 overall in 2024? A.J. Brown's season had a disappointing ending after a red-hot start to 2023, but he still finished as the wide receiver 5 in PPR, and considering that he had a low touchdown rate compared to some of the other seasons in his career where he's already eclipsed double-digit touchdowns with Philly and did it once in Tennessee. This was A.J. Brown's lowest touchdown scored in a season since 2021, where he only played 13 games. So positive touchdown progression should be something that we expect from A.J. Brown after only having 7 touchdowns last season. Let's just keep in mind, A.J. Brown, 5th overall in terms of PPR format at the wide receiver position, had 7 receiving touchdowns and only one receiving touchdown in his last 8 games of the season last year. That's just something that has to change. There has to be more touchdowns going A.J. Brown's way. It's way more likely that he hits double-digit touchdowns versus repeating around 7 to 8 receiving touchdowns. A.J. Brown's 150-plus targets aren't going anywhere, no matter how good Devontae Smith sounds in camp or how much we project him to take a great year 3 leap like most talented wide receivers do. This is still the guy in the Philadelphia Eagles offense, and we shouldn't be, pecking A.J. Brown lower down the totem pole because he has a wide receiver across from him who's just as good. I mean, look at Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill. We don't impact Tyreek Hill's rankings negatively because he plays against a super talented wide receiver in Jalen Waddle. So why would we do the same for somebody like A.J. Brown? A.J. Brown had much less targets in 2022, 2 seasons ago, and had significantly less receptions than he did in 2023, but had 11 receiving touchdowns. So we should be expecting somebody like A.J. Brown to be floating around that 9, 10, 11, 12 touchdown mark. 7 touchdowns in a season for him, being healthy the entire season, is more like an outlier than something to expect to happen again. For A.J. Brown, wide receiver 1 overall, to me, is definitely a ceiling for him and definitely in the possibility of range of outcomes. But how likely is that when you have Tyreek Hill, CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson, and even Jamar Chase competing for that top wide receiver spot overall? And lastly, my dark horse candidate to finish as the tight end 1, given that obviously Sam Laporta and Travis Kelce are fighting for that tight end 1 spot, and some would throw Trey McBride into that scenario as well. But what if I told you Dalton Kincaid is my dark horse candidate to finish as the tight end 1 overall? Dalton Kincaid is now entering the Buffalo Bills offense as probably their most skilled pass catcher in 2024. And I know that sounds crazy because they drafted Keon Coleman, and there are other talented wide receivers on this team like Curtis Samuel. But other than him and Khalil Shakir, they probably have the best connection with Josh Allen on the roster. And we know Dalton Kincaid can handle a almost wide receiver-like volume in his offense because across from Stephon Diggs, he had 91 targets. And no, that's not the most like somebody like Sam Laporta did with 120. But given that Stephon Diggs has left the offense and somebody needs to take up those 200 targets that are leaving, it's pretty safe to say that Dalton Kincaid should see a bump from 91 targets to a significantly higher amount in his second season, and with more targets to be available to be had for a Buffalo Bills receiver. With Diggs leaving, it's really not unrealistic for somebody like Kincaid to hit 120 targets, which is a massive amount of volume for a tight end in fantasy. We talked a little bit earlier about how Josh Allen had 15 rushing touchdowns last season, and if for some reason they weren't able to hit that number again in 2024, it's likely that, maybe the touchdowns go to James Cook, but they could also throw the ball a lot more than what they did in 2023. 15 rushing touchdowns for a quarterback is probably not something we should expect or even project to be in Josh Allen's near future. So if Dalton Kincaid can take more red zone opportunities and handle more targets with Stephon Diggs leaving, as I've mentioned probably like 3 times now, which is probably getting annoying, there is a clear pathway for somebody like Dalton Kincaid to finish at the tight end 1 overall. I still think there are a lot of hurdles that need to be climbed in order for Kincaid to reach that status, but why can't he be the Bills' number 1 target this year in 2024? He obviously didn't have nearly as many targets as the top target getters like a TJ Hawkinson or Sam Laporta or even Evan Ingram, but who's to say that he can't rival Sam Laporta and Travis Kelce for that top tight end spot, given that he's going to get a bump in target share? We know that for certain. So those are my 4 dark horse candidates to finish number 1 overall at their position. Of course, I'm not expecting this to happen, and I'm not saying that each one of these players needs to be taken in round 1 or the first at their position taken off the board. This is more so talking about who has the upside and who has the potential to not only break their ADP, but break your fantasy football leagues. As if you could grab one of these guys and it winds up being the best at their position, you're setting yourself up for a good opportunity to win your fantasy football championships. If you like this video and if you like fantasy football content like this, feel free to smash that like button for me. It costs you nothing, but it means the world to me, and it will help get my videos out to more and more fantasy football fans. If you think I'm talking nonsense and you think I'm just yapping away in front of a camera, leave your comments down below and we'll have a discussion about it. But that's all I have for you all today. My name is Turtle. I'm signing out, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Peace.